But what do you think? Are the 49ers overrated coming into this year? Some people would claim, yeah, you know what? They don't have, they don't know exactly what's going on at the quarterback position. They're a little thin at defensive end. You're starting Colton McKivitz at right tackle. Are the Niners overrated? What do you think?
It's an interesting question. It really generated. It actually started out in Philadelphia, right? Elliot Shore Parks, who's I think he's a radio guy out there, does some writing too. He originally was the one about, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, who said that the 49ers are the most overrated team in the NFL because they're expected to be, right there in the Super Bowl hunt. And I think his reasoning for it was because of the unknowns at the quarterback position, which is understandable. But beyond that, no way in hell are the 49ers overrated. They have the best roster in the league, I think, and especially in the NFC. And if the quarterback position is healthy, they're going to be right there. It's going to be them. They're going to be in the NFC Championship game, probably in the Super Bowl, if they just match what their potential is with what they have on this roster.
To me, I would go right back to, now we don't know the health for sure of Brock Purdy, which makes the beginning of training camp all the more intriguing. And that is the ultimate question that needs to be answered because everybody beyond that is a little bit of a projection. If you have Sam Darnold as a starting quarterback, he's a first-year guy with the Niners. He's had just not a whole lot of success in the NFL. If Trey Lance is the number one guy, it's a projection because it's based on the traits that Trey has and the growth that he's made since entering the league. But if the Niners are getting the Brock Purdy that they saw last year, the interview that I think I would point to would be the Alex Smith interview with Matt Mayoko, where Smith basically was glowing about both Lance and Purdy, and he basically said that the key word I thought that really got, kind of turned my head was sustainability. He described Brock's success as not just impressive but sustainable, and I think that has been the primary. I've tried to crystallize as we've talked about this quarterback question over and over during the offseason. The people that are pushing back on the 49ers or Brock Purdy individually, what they're really arguing using a lot of different verbiage to make their argument, they're arguing that it's not sustainable. That, yeah, he had success. Yeah, he went undefeated. Yeah, he won every game that he started and finished. He was the first quarterback or the third quarterback in like 50 years to win rookie quarterback to win 2 playoff games. But the argument is clearly that there are a lot of people out there that don't believe it's sustainable. And Smith, I thought, had the greatest line. He's like, look, a lot of these traits are kind of overrated. Arm strength, 40 time. It really comes down to processing, accuracy, and timing. And he thinks that Brock has those 3 traits and that it wasn't accidental and that the success that he had last year was not only impressive, but that it's sustainable. And I agree with him. I really do. And for that reason, I think if you really believe that Purdy's success is sustainable, you can't argue that the Niners are overrated.
I agree. I agree with Alex Smith's assessment. I do believe that it's sustainable as long as he's healthy, fully healthy, and physically and mentally. I think it's completely sustainable. In part because we know what he can do. I don't think he's going to regress. One of the biggest things that people talk about is that the film is out there on him now. I push back on that one because I don't care if there's film out there because he's got Kyle Shanahan calling the plays, and Kyle Shanahan's one of the best play callers in the NFL today. So I don't have a problem with that either. And then you add in what the 49ers roster looks like. They have 6 guys that are in the top 50 in the NFL right now. Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle. Those guys all help him out too, right? And you're talking about Alex Smith. I think the one that I really liked, I liked Alex Smith. That's why I wrote about it, what he had to say. But I was listening to Steve Young yesterday, and what Steve Young said was just he took it another level, right? Because he came out, and Steve Young is a guy who's really smart. He doesn't say things without knowing what he's saying,
right?
And he said he came out and he said, you talk about the culture. That's what the 49ers have: the innovative offense, the play calling, the talent. It all comes together. And then when it comes to Brock Purdy, he says it's easy to say last pick in the draft at his size, arm strength, and everything else. There's limitations. When talking about Brock Purdy, I don't think you should speak that way because I think he's the kind of guy who's going to make you look like a dummy. And we've seen a lot of this offseason. A lot of people pushing back because of his lack of size, the fact that he's not the biggest, not the strongest, not the fastest. And my whole thing is I don't really give a rip about any of those things because we just saw him do it on the field. It's not like all of a sudden teams are going to shut him down. We've heard this for years in San Francisco since 2017 with Jimmy Garoppolo. And even with Garoppolo's limitations, they were still able to move the ball. They were still able to put up nearly 30 points a game back in 2019. So if Brock Purdy's fully healthy, if he's the guy that he was last season, give him some experience on top of that. I think the 49ers are fine.
Well, I'll go as far as this. I would say that the 49ers may be underrated. I don't think they're overrated. I've seen people, ESPN is ranking the Niners lower than the Seahawks in their future power rankings. As far as I'm concerned, the 49ers have two young quarterbacks that I think are as good a young prospects as there is at quarterback in the league. And they also have kind of shown that they understand free agency. They keep picking off great players in free agency. 2 years ago, Charvarius Ward. This year, Javon Hargrave. They understand how to use free agency to not just complement their team, but to add significant pieces while at the same time manipulating the compensatory formula so that they let more players walk every year than they take in, but they take in difference makers, and then they take those compensatory picks, they pour them back into their draft haul, combine that with their day three success and their success of signing players after the draft. I think the 49ers have the best roster in the game right now when you're looking at star talent at the top of your roster and quality depth on the back end of the roster. I think, John Lynch and Adam Peters deserve a ton of credit for having both. I mean, there are teams that have great players, like the Rams had a few years ago. They had some great players. Stafford, Donald, Ramsey. I mean, they had some really great individual talents. But where were they thin? They were thin on the back end of their roster. Heck, go back to the dawning of free agency, the Cowboys in the mid to late 90s. They had great players at the end there with Barry Switzer, with Aikman and the triplets, right? And Irvin and Emmett and Novacek and some great players on defense. But what happened to them? They were very thin on the back end of their roster. The Niners have found a way in the salary cap era to have a huge core of great players and have really, really high quality depth throughout the back end of their roster. And so if you said to me, are the Niners overrated? I would push back in a huge way and say they're not just not overrated, they are underrated. Because if you look at the improvement that a team typically makes or a player typically makes in his career, the biggest improvement is year 1 to year 2. And the second biggest improvement is year 2 to year 3. Look how many players the 49ers have on their roster that are in, that year 2 or year 3 window. So I think that you've got the arrow pointing up on such a high percentage of players and so many great players on the roster that I think people are sleeping on how improved this team potentially can be. And I think once we see them hit the field, it's going to be apparent to everybody this is a juggernaut.
Absolutely. This is the very top heavy team in terms of you look at the top end talent. I listed off some of those names, and I didn't even include Ayuk. I didn't include Hargrave, Greenlaw, Hufanga, who was an all pro last year. Their top end talent is as good, if not better than everybody else. And then you start looking at what they've built behind it. I think for the 49ers, a lot of that, which we don't talk about when it comes to how good this roster is the job that the coaches do with developing this talent to be able to get a guy in the 5th, 6th, 7th round or as an undrafted free agent and turn him into a all pro like Talanoa Hufanga or what have you. That takes a ton of that goes to your coaching. A guy like Spencer Burford coming in as a rookie and starting every game at right guard, expected to be your full-time starter this season. A guy like Colton McKivitz, who we haven't seen a whole lot of, but they've been developing him for this moment for the last few years. And they believe in him. And I think, their roster and their offensive line is really solid as a result of it. this week there's been a lot of talk about the running back position, right? About how it's undervalued. Well, what did the 49ers do last year when they realized that there was a need and an opportunity? They pulled the trigger on a trade. They got the best running back in the NFL that fits their style onto their roster. And, a guy like Christian McCaffrey and everything he does that he brings to the table completely, transforms their offense and the way that it attacks defenses and it forces defenses to respond. And you add that again to Kyle Shanahan and the coaching staff. And this is 49er team is right there. If they stay healthy, we're looking, this is going into mid-February, I think.